I've always believed that the most dangerous people wear the nicest suits. Sitting at the Calloway family dining table, I watched the truth of that unfold right in front of me. Raymond Calloway, my father-in-law, the so-called patriarch of this empire, held court like a king, passing out envelopes to his grandchildren as if bestowing blessings on a loyal congregation. The long oak table gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier, but the air was anything but warm. It was the kind of night where you could almost hear the tension buzzing between the crystal glasses and the polished silverware. Ellie Raymond said, his voice smooth like an old oil man's charm, "Your college fund just got a significant boost." Ellie, my niece by marriage, blonde and perfect in that cheerleader next door way, squealed with delight as she tore open the envelope, revealing a check for $50,000. Beside me, my 8-year-old son Ben sat quietly, his little hands folded in his lap, watching it all unfold. His dark eyes flicked between me and Raymond, full of questions he was too polite to ask. He's got my jawline, my eyes, but his mother's gentle smile, a combination that melts hearts. Or at least it should. Raymond kept going, handing envelopes around the table like candy. My wife Nicole sat beside me, her fingers resting on the tablecloth. Wedding ring catching the light, blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, eyes downcast, lips tight. Not once did she glance at me or Ben. Not once. Then Raymond's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Ben," he said, feigning warmth as he motioned for my son. "Come here, kiddo." Ben looked at me unsure. I gave him the nod. He slid off his chair and walked over to his grandfather, who patted his head with the kind of mechanical affection you give a neighbor's dog. "You're a good boy," Ben Raymond said, his tone turning colder with every word. "But you understand, right? The trust funds, the cars when you turn 16, the family vacations to Europe, those are for Calloway's family. Real family." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I watched the color drain from Ben's face, his little shoulders stiffen. Nicole said nothing, not a damn thing. No sharp intake of breath, no protest, just silence. For a second, Ben's face crumpled. He looked at me and I saw the heartbreak flash across his features before he straightened, trying to be strong. "My boy, my son. Understood, Grandpa?" he whispered, then turned and walked back to his seat, each step slower than the last. Something inside me snapped. That cold, tactical part of my brain, the one I used to keep men alive in the field, clicked into place. I scanned the table like it was a battlefield. Nicole's mother, Patricia, looked down at her plate, uncomfortable. Nicole's siblings glanced at each other but said nothing. Nicole herself stared at her wine glass as if it might swallow her whole. That was the moment I realized none of them were ever going to stand up for my son. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope I'd been waiting to use for months. Placing it on the table, I slid it across to Ben. "Remember what I told you, bud," I said softly. "If Grandpa ever hurt you again, you give him this." Ben's eyes widened as he took the envelope. Slowly, with a kind of fragile courage that made my throat tight, he walked back over to Raymond and handed it to him. "What's this?" Raymond asked, brows furrowing in irritation as he tore it open. The blood drained from his face as he scanned the contents. His hands shook as he flipped through the photos, timestamps, and detailed reports. Every secret he thought was buried: tax evasion, offshore accounts, illegal wire transfers, laid bare on crisp white paper. Raymond's mouth opened in a silent scream before the sound finally broke free, a guttural, panicked wail that seemed to shake the walls. Nicole froze her glass, slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. Patricia gasped, and the rest of the family sat stunned, as if the earth itself had tilted under them. Ben stood tall, his eyes wide but steady, watching the man who had just tried to crush him unravel. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "That's my son, Raymond," I said, my voice low. "Steady, dangerous. And we stick together. Always." The room was silent except for the sound of Raymond's ragged breathing and the crackling of the fireplace. I looked at Nicole, who finally dared to meet my gaze. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy with fear. For the first time in our marriage, she looked at me and saw the man she had never truly understood. And that was just the beginning. The house was quiet except for the hum of the security monitors in my office. I sat in the dark, the glow of the screens casting shadows across my face, watching the past 3 months of my life unfold in chilling detail. Nicole's voice crackled through the speakers. "We'll stick to the plan," she said, the audio timestamp flashing 2 weeks ago. "I still don't know if I can go through with it." Derek's voice replied, low and smooth like a snake coiling around its prey. "Jack's not the kind of man you just leave, Nicole. He's dangerous." Nicole's laugh was soft, almost pitying. "That's why we have to move fast. Once we access the trust fund, we're gone. He'll never see it coming." I clenched my fists until my knuckles popped. The trust fund, my money, my son's future. They'd been planning this for months, slipping in and out of hotels, disabling their phone's GPS, thinking they were smart enough to stay ahead of me. They didn't know I'd installed an extra layer of surveillance during the last routine security update, hidden mics in Nicole's car, GPS tags on Derek's vehicle, motion sensors near the front gate. I'd been trained to gather intelligence in hostile environments, to predict moves before they were made. They thought they were playing checkers. I'd been playing chess since the day I signed the marriage license. The doorbell rang sharp and unexpected, slicing through the silence at 11:47 p.m. I checked the security monitor. Derek Sloan stood on my porch, looking around like a man who knew he had no business being there. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, pupils dilated. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Jack. He tried for a casual smile, but it cracked under the weight of his nerves. Is Nicole home? I need to talk to her. It's urgent. She's asleep, I said evenly, standing in the doorway, arms crossed. I let my gaze rest on his throat where his pulse hammered under the skin. About the Whitmore property deal, he blurted, licking his lips. She told me to stop by if I heard anything. There it was, a lie so obvious it might as well have been written across his forehead in neon. Nicole didn't know a damn thing about any Whitmore property. I'll let her know you stopped by, I said, my voice cold enough to freeze water. He shifted his weight, glanced over my shoulder like he expected her to appear in a robe, breathless, ready to flee with him. She's asleep, I repeated, sharper this time. The door clicked shut with a finality that left no room for discussion. I turned back to my screens, watching him retreat down the driveway like a man who knew he'd just walked into a trap and had no idea how deep it ran. My eyes returned to the footage. Nicole's routines were as precise as they were damning, leaving the house at 10:03 a.m. After Ben was safely at school, returning exactly 43 minutes later. Same time every Thursday, same hotel parking lot. The recordings told the rest of the story. Her voice soft, seductive, promising Derek a future built on stolen money and my destruction. Ben's just collateral damage, she'd whispered once, and the sound of those words, my son reduced to an afterthought, felt like a blade against my ribs. I paused the audio, staring at the waveform on the screen, my breath steady despite the storm raging beneath my skin. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. I spent the next hour digging into Derek's background, using tools most civilians couldn't dream of accessing: deep web archives, classified databases, connections from my military days. David Kramer, that was his real name. Married twice before both wives disappeared with their life savings wiped clean. One institutionalized in Nevada, convinced she was losing her mind. The other fled to Mexico, haunted and broken. Nicole wasn't his first mark. She was just the latest. But me, I wasn't just another target. I was the wrong man to cross. I looked at the photo of Ben on my desk, his school picture, all gap-toothed grin and wide, hopeful eyes. I whispered to the dark, "They won't touch you, son. I'll burn the world down first." Then I opened my laptop and began to type. A document titled Operation Firewall blinked onto the screen. My plan was simple: sever their resources, expose their crimes, and dismantle their lives piece by piece. By the time I was done, there wouldn't be a single corner of their world left for them to hide in. The envelope I'd given Raymond was just the opening move. The real game was only beginning. I woke at 5:00 a.m., sharp the way I always had since my military days. Some habits never die, no matter how many years have passed. I sat in the quiet kitchen, nursing a mug of black coffee, watching the sun bleed over the Dallas skyline. Today was going to change everything. The clink of cereal in a bowl broke the silence. Ben shuffled into the kitchen in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair stuck up in every direction, and for a brief, blessed moment, the weight of last night's dinner faded. He was just my kid again. "Morning, Bud," I said, sliding the milk across the table. "Morning, Dad." He yawned and started pouring cereal, then paused, eyes wide. "Are we in trouble?" I met his gaze, steady and calm. "No, son. We're a team, remember. Morrison men stick together." Ben's grin was small but real. Morrison men stick together. As he dug into his cereal, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. But the war wasn't over, far from it. I heard the soft footsteps behind me before I saw her. Nicole stood in the doorway wearing the silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary. Her hair was perfect, like she'd spent hours curling it even at this ungodly hour. "Jack," she started, her voice tentative. I didn't look up. "Coffee's in the pot." She hovered, watching me, and then sat across from me, folding her hands in front of her like a nervous schoolgirl. "About last night," she began. "What about it?" I kept my tone even, like we were talking about the weather. "Dad was out of line," she said, her voice trembling, just enough to sound believable. "Ben is family. I should have said something, and I'm sorry. I studied her face, the careful placement of guilt and concern like a mask she'd rehearsed in the mirror. You should have, I agreed. But you didn't. She flinched just a little. I'll talk to Dad today. I'll make him apologize. I'll threaten to cut him off if he doesn't include Ben in everything. I swear, Jack, I'll fix this. I stared at her for a long, heavy moment. If I hadn't heard the recordings, hadn't seen the surveillance footage, maybe I'd believe her. Maybe I'd believe the tears in her voice, the way her hand reached across the table like she was trying to bridge the distance, but I wasn't that man anymore. That's very generous of you, I said finally. Relief flooded her face, but before she could bask in it, the doorbell rang. Nicole's smile faded. She stood up, smoothing the robe over her hips, a flicker of nerves flashing in her eyes. I moved to the door, already knowing what it would be. A courier in a crisp uniform held out an envelope. Delivery for Mrs. Nicole Porter. I need a signature. Nicole's hands trembled as she signed, her fingers barely gripping the pen. She opened the envelope, and I watched her face drain of color as she stared at the contents. A photograph. One I'd selected personally. Derek's car parked at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, time-stamped in bold at the corner, 11:07 a.m., the exact time she'd told me she was at a yoga class. Beneath the photo, a note in my handwriting, we need to talk. All three of us. Tonight, 8:00 p.m., the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Come alone. Ben's at his sleepover. I've already arranged it. P.S. Derek's marriage history makes for fascinating reading. Nicole's hands shook so badly the envelope nearly slipped from her grasp. Jack, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I took the photograph from her and held it up between us. You've always been good with words, Nicole, but I think it's time for the truth. Don't you? She stared at me, her lip quivering, her eyes filling with tears that might have been genuine, though by now I didn't care enough to tell the difference. I leaned in, my voice low and firm. 8:00. Don't be late. I walked past her, heading upstairs to pack Ben's overnight bag. He'd be staying at the Matthews house tonight, just like I'd promised. I'd already spoken to Mrs. Matthews, made sure she knew I'd be unreachable for a few hours, but that Ben was excited about the sleepover. Nicole stayed frozen in the kitchen, clutching the envelope like it was a live grenade. For a second, I let myself feel it, the weight of what I was about to do, the man I'd become, the choices I'd made. Then I thought of Ben's face last night, when Raymond told him he wasn't really family. That was all the clarity I needed. Morrison men stick together, and tonight Nicole and Derek were going to learn what that meant. The warehouse sat in the shadows of Industrial Boulevard like a forgotten relic, an unmarked building I'd bought under a shell company 3 years ago. From the outside, it looked like a storage unit for old equipment, but inside it was something else entirely. I stood in the middle of the cavernous space, the concrete floor polished smooth, the walls lined with industrial shelving that held everything from tactical gear to network servers humming quietly in the dark. A single light hung above the center of the room, casting a harsh glow over 3 chairs arranged in a tight triangle. The air smelled like cold metal and something sharper anticipation. At exactly 7:55 p.m. I saw the headlights. Nicole arrived first, pulling up in the white BMW I'd leased for her last year. She stepped out, heels clicking against the pavement, wearing that black dress I once told her she looked stunning in back, when I still believed the lies. Her hair was pulled back and her face was pale under the dim light. She looked like a woman walking into a courtroom, not a warehouse. A moment later, Derek's SUV pulled in, tires crunching over gravel. He climbed out, adjusting his suit jacket like he was heading into a business meeting, not a reckoning. His eyes darted around, calculating. They walked in together, though there was a space between them, an invisible gap, the kind that forms when two people realize the walls are closing in. Jack, Nicole started, voice tight. What is this? Sit down, I said, nodding to the chairs. Derek opened his mouth, probably to try one of his slick lines, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped closer, my posture calm but commanding, the same stance I used to wear during interrogations overseas. Sit, now. They sat. Nicole crossed her legs, hands gripping her clutch so tightly I thought she might snap the leather. Derek leaned back like he could charm his way out of this. Let's skip the pleasantries. I began pacing slowly. Derek, or should I say David Kramer, 2 ex-wives, both mysteriously disappearing with their bank accounts emptied. One's in a mental facility, the other fled to Mexico. You're a con artist, plain and simple. Derek's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Smart move, denial would only make this worse. And you, Nicole, I said, turning my gaze to her. Her lip trembled. You married me because you needed a savior. Your father's gambling debts nearly destroyed your family, and I was the fool who paid them off. You told Derek that Ben was just collateral, that you were using me for protection. Nicole's breath hitched. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Jack, I, I held up a hand, stopping her cold. Save it. I pressed a button on the remote in my hand. A large screen descended from the ceiling, flickering to life. On it, a collage of images, Derek and Nicole at the Hyatt Financial Records GPS logs, called transcripts. Their plan laid bare piece by piece. I know everything. And now you're going to listen. Derek shifted in his seat, sweat beading at his temple. You can't prove any of this in court, he said, voice cracking under the pressure. I don't need to, I leaned forward, voice like steel. I just need to prove it to the people who matter. Your investors, your partners, the media. I wonder how they'll feel when they see this. I let the images roll across the screen. Derek's previous victims, Nicole's wire transfers, the hotel meetups. Nicole sobbed quietly, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. Here's what's going to happen. I continued, standing tall, arms crossed. Derek, you're going to transfer every penny you've taken from Nicole's family, plus interest, into a trust fund for Ben. You'll leave town tonight and never come back. If I ever see you again, if you contact Nicole again, or if you run another Keystone, I will personally deliver your information to Jennifer and Maria, your ex-wives. And I will make sure they have everything they need to tear your life apart. Derek nodded frantically, panic flooding his face. Okay, I'll leave. Tonight, Nicole, I said, turning back to her, my tone ice cold. You'll sign the divorce papers tonight. You'll walk away with nothing, no spousal support, no claims to Ben. You'll tell your family it was your decision. If you refuse, I'll make sure the IRS, the FBI, and a dozen other agencies get everything I have on your father's finances, the offshore accounts, the bribes, the embezzlement. Raymond will spend the rest of his life in federal prison, and you'll be right there beside him. Nicole's sobs turned into dry, heaving gasps. She looked at Derek like he might save her, but he was already sinking, a man who knew the ship had sunk beneath him. Your choice, I finished, voice quiet but final. You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, I burn everything to the ground. The warehouse was silent except for Nicole's ragged breathing. I looked down at my watch, 8:56 p.m. Meeting's over, I said. Get out. They scrambled for the door like rats from a sinking ship. As they vanished into the night, I exhaled slowly. The game was far from over, but tonight I'd move the pieces exactly where I wanted them. Morris and men stick together, and now it was checkmate. The storm rolled in at 6:15 a.m., not outside, but inside my inbox. 3 major contracts gone. No warning, no explanation, just cold impersonal emails citing strategic realignment and budget constraints. I stared at the screen, the words blurring into each other. 3 contracts, worth half my annual revenue, evaporated overnight. Coincidence? No. This was a coordinated strike. My phone buzzed. Jack, it's Emma, Nicole's sister, her voice sharp like a whip. I figured you'd be calling, I said, keeping my tone level. You've destroyed our family, she hissed. Dad's in the hospital. The FBI raided his poker club last night. His accounts are frozen, and now the whole town is whispering about how you took down the Callaways. What kind of man are you, Jack? The kind who protects his son, I said flatly. Tell Raymond I said hi. She let out a frustrated sob and hung up. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness ground me. This wasn't over. Of course it wasn't. People like the Callaways didn't go down without trying to take someone with them. A notification flashed across my screen. Marcus Callaway uploaded a video. My family is being attacked. I clicked play. Marcus Emma's 12-year-old son sat in his bedroom, eyes wide and brimming with fake outrage. My cousin Ben's dad is a criminal, he said, voice trembling, just enough to seem rehearsed. He hurt my grandpa. He's dangerous. The comments were already filling up with sympathetic strangers eating up the story like it was gospel. I leaned back in my chair, my breath slow and controlled. Let them come. That afternoon, Ben came home from school with a shiner on his cheek and a tremble in his voice. Marcus said, I'm a thief's kid, he whispered, eyes downcast. My hands clenched into fists. What did you do? I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. I told him you're the best dad ever, Ben said, wiping at his tears, and that he's just mad because his grandpa's a liar. I knelt down gently, tilting his chin up so he'd meet my eyes. You defended our family, Ben. That's the most important thing. He nodded, his little hands shaking. I stood and grabbed my phone. Time for the next phase. First, call Sarah Hendricks. Sarah, I have information on a private investigator named Jim Castanos. He's been following my son, photographing him, stalking him at school. That crosses a line even for your old bureau friends, doesn't it? Her voice hardened. You're sure? I've got footage, GPS data, and financial records. He's working for the Callaways. If anything happens to Ben, I'll consider it a direct failure of federal protection. You understand what I'm saying, right? Crystal clear. Sarah said, her tone clipped and professional. I'll handle it. Second call, Mrs. Matthews. Jack. The boys had a great time at the sleepover. Ben is such a sweetheart. I appreciate that I cut in, keeping my tone calm but urgent. Listen, I need you to be aware there may be rumors flying around the school about me and Ben. Nicole's family is trying to create trouble, and I just want you to know none of it's true. If anyone approaches you or the school, please call me first. Of course, Jack. We know the kind of father you are. I'll talk to my husband too. He won't let this nonsense touch Ben. Third call, my lawyer. I need restraining orders filed today. Maya Calloway, Marcus's parents, anyone associated with the Calloway family. Grounds harassment of a minor, coordinated defamation and intimidation. I'll get it started, my lawyer replied, sounding impressed. By sundown, the pieces were moving. Then came the cherry on top. I hacked into Jim Costanos' files, years of dirt on other wealthy clients, all of it illegal. Surveillance of ex-wives, rival CEOs, even a senator's daughter. It was a goldmine. I packaged it all, videos, documents, and timelines, and sent it to 3 places at once: the FBI, the Texas State Licensing Board, and a pair of investigative journalists. By nightfall, the news broke. Private investigator arrested for illegal surveillance of minors and witnesses. The Callaways had just lost their enforcer. My phone rang at 9:47 p.m. Emma's voice was shaking with fury. You son of a Jim's been arrested, and now the FBI is asking questions about us. What the hell did you do? I told you to stay away from my son. I said, my voice calm as ice. You didn't listen. This isn't over, Jack, she screamed. I smiled coldly. No, Emma, for you it is. I ended the call and turned to Ben, who was sitting on the couch reading a book about sharks. Dad, can we go to the aquarium this weekend? He asked, looking up with innocent hope. I knelt down and ruffled his hair. You bet, buddy. We're going to see every shark in that tank. Because no matter how many predators came for us, Morrison men stuck together. And I wasn't just going to defend my family. I was going to annihilate anyone who tried to tear it apart. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I'd already received the news I'd been waiting for. Raymond Calloway, once untouchable, the self-proclaimed king of Dallas, had been let out of his high-stakes poker club in handcuffs at 2:13 a.m. The feds hit him hard. IRS, FBI, SEC, every alphabet agency you could think of had come knocking. His accounts were frozen. His properties were seized. His world had come crashing down like a house of cards built on lies. I watched the footage on the morning news. Raymond shuffling past the cameras in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, head down. The man who once looked at my son like he was dirt beneath his shoes was now the face of a federal indictment. Ben sat on the couch next to me, sipping orange juice, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just been avenged in the most public way possible. Dad, why do they always show people in those orange clothes on TV? He asked, his voice curious and innocent. Because sometimes bad people think they're above the rules. I said, keeping my voice even. And eventually the rules catch up to them. Before I could say more, my phone buzzed. Emma. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Jack, she hissed, her voice ragged. What did you do? They raided Dad's club. They're freezing accounts, asking questions. Dad had a heart attack last night, Jack. He's in the ICU. Maybe he should have thought about that before he laundered money through shell companies and off-the-books poker games. I replied, my voice cold as steel. You destroyed us, she spat. I let the silence stretch before answering, slow and deliberate. No, Emma. You destroyed yourselves when you tried to use my son as a pawn. Don't ever call me again. I hung up and turned to Ben, who was flipping through his shark book. Hey, bud, get dressed. We've got a big day ahead of us. Are we still going to the aquarium? He asked, eyes lighting up. Absolutely, I said, ruffling his hair. As Ben ran off, my phone buzzed again. Sarah Hendricks. Jack, we've got Costanos in custody. He's singing like a canary, she said, her voice tight. He admitted to the whole thing, working for the Callaways, following you and Ben, taking photos outside your house, even planting fake stories to smear your business. Good, I said, my tone flat. Make sure it sticks. It will, she replied. But Jack, they're scared now. Emma's been trying to spin it to the press that you're a dangerous ex-military type with a violent streak. They're playing dirty. I expected nothing less, I said, standing and pacing the room. But they're playing a game they don't understand. I'm not just defending myself anymore, Sarah. I'm going on offense. That afternoon, I sat in my lawyer's office, a sleek glass-walled suite in downtown Dallas, overlooking the city that had once been Raymond Calloway's kingdom. I want restraining orders on every member of the Calloway family. I told him, my voice calm but firm. Emma, Marcus, Patricia, everyone. Grounds harassment of a minor defamation and coordinated stalking. My lawyer, Tom Callahan, nodded as he took notes. This will send a clear message. That's the point, I said. By the end of the day, the paperwork was filed. Restraining orders, formal complaints, civil suits for harassment. I even had a private investigator, one I could trust, deliver cease and desist letters to every Calloway property. They wanted war. They had it. By evening, the local news was ablaze. Headlines scrolled across the screen. Billionaire oil magnate Raymond Calloway, arrested in multi-agency sting. Sources reveal family feud, ex-son-in-law, files restraining orders amid scandal. Private investigator tied to harassment ring faces federal charges. I sat on the couch watching the coverage while Ben colored pictures at the kitchen table. Nicole hadn't reached out. Not a word, not a text, not a call, but I knew she was watching. That night, as the city glowed outside my windows, my phone buzzed again. A message from unknown number. This isn't over. You've made enemies, Jack. Watch your back. I stared at the screen, feeling that old familiar coldness settle in my bones, the same coldness I'd felt in combat zones when the enemy regrouped for one last desperate strike. I deleted the message without a second thought. They wanted to make me the villain in their story. Fine, but they'd learn soon enough I didn't just defend what was mine. I destroyed anyone who tried to take it, and tomorrow I'd show them exactly what that meant. It was 8:00 a.m. when the courthouse doors swung open and Raymond Calloway shuffled in, shackled and defeated. The once mighty oil baron of Dallas, a man who used to hold court in private jets and penthouse boardrooms, now looked like a hollowed-out scarecrow in an orange jumpsuit. The cameras flashed reporters shouting his name, microphones shoved in his face. Raymond barely registered them. His skin was pale sunken. His hands trembled at his sides. The weight of decades of crime, fraud, money laundering, racketeering had finally crushed him. And I stood there watching. Not because I wanted to gloat, not because I needed a front-row seat to his downfall, but because Ben deserved to know that the man who tried to erase him from the family had been erased instead. "Dad, is that really him?" Ben asked, tugging on my sleeve. He stood next to me in his best button-down shirt, looking up with those wide, dark eyes, Lisa's eyes. I knelt down to his level, blocking out the chaos around us. "Yeah, bud, that's him." Ben frowned. "He looks small." I smiled faintly. That's what happens to bullies when they lose their power. We turned to leave, but I caught a glimpse of Nicole in the crowd, half hidden behind a pillar, sunglasses on, hair pulled back as if she could melt into the background. She looked thinner, drained, her shoulders hunched like she was shrinking into herself. She caught my eye, and for a moment the chaos faded. "Just us." She mouthed the words, "Thank you." I stared back, my face like stone. There was nothing to thank me for. I'd spared her because of Ben, because some part of me had once believed in the woman she pretended to be. But the woman standing there wasn't the same one who'd laughed with Ben over pancakes or held his hand on the first day of school. She was a ghost of her own making, and she knew it. We left the courthouse in silence, Ben's small hand gripping mine. By the time we got home, my phone buzzed with a blocked call. I let it go to voicemail. Another message popped up. "Known number, you think it's over? You're not safe, Jack. You and your son are targets now." I sat at the kitchen table staring at the words. My pulse didn't spike. My breath stayed steady. I'd heard threats before, whispers in dark alleys, notes slipped under doors, cold warnings delivered with forced smiles. But this wasn't the Middle East. This wasn't some war zone where I couldn't see the faces of the men hunting me. This was Dallas, Texas. And I knew exactly who was behind this. The Callaways were circling the wagons, desperate to claw back whatever they could. And they'd made the fatal mistake of thinking I was done. I called Sarah. "They're trying to paint me as the aggressor. They're using my military past, spinning it to look like I'm the threat. I need your help." Sarah sighed, her voice tight. "They're desperate. We've seen this tactic before, smear campaigns weaponizing public opinion. But Jack, if they push too far, they won't," I cut in. "Because I'm going to end this. Tonight, Jack." I hung up. By 6 p.m., I had files prepped. Every dirty secret I'd uncovered about the Callaways, their shell companies, their offshore accounts, bribes to city officials, money funneled through charities that didn't exist. Every piece of it compiled into neat folders, time-stamped, geotagged, cross-referenced. And I sent it all to the IRS, the FBI, the Texas State Attorney's Office, and just for good measure to every major news outlet in the state. Then I made a single call to Nicole. Her voice was barely a whisper when she answered. Jack, you want it out. You have it. But if you ever try to reach out to Ben, if you even think about contacting him, I'll bury you, understand? A soft sob on the other end. I understand. Good. I ended the call and stared out the window. Ben was playing in the yard chasing a soccer ball across the grass. His laughter floated through the air, pure, untainted, exactly what I'd been fighting for. Let them come. Let them run. They'd learn soon enough that some fathers don't just protect their sons. They make sure no one dares threaten them again. Not now, not ever. 3 months later, Dallas felt like a different city, quieter somehow after the storm. The headlines had faded from the front page, the news trucks packed up and gone. But the ripple effects of what happened still lingered in the eyes of everyone who once called the Callaways untouchable. Raymond Callaway had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge's words were sharp, deliberate. You used your wealth and influence to manipulate those around you, but no one is above the law. Emma and her husband fled to Canada, fugitives faces on a federal watch list. Nicole's mother, Patricia, lost everything. The family estate was liquidated to pay restitution. And Nicole herself, she was barely a shadow in my rearview mirror. I knew where she was working as a waitress in a rundown diner across town, attending night classes at a community college. I hadn't seen her in months, and I intended to keep it that way. Ben never asked about her anymore. He was too busy thriving. Soccer practice 3 days a week, a chess club on Fridays, Saturday trips to the aquarium or the science museum. We built a life together that was ours, just ours. And then one crisp fall evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Nicole standing there, smaller than I remembered, thinner, her blonde hair darkened and tied back. She wore no makeup, no designer clothes, just jeans, a hoodie, and a look in her eyes I couldn't quite place. Jack, she said softly, her voice catching. I'm not here to cause trouble. I wanted to say thank you for letting me walk away. I said nothing. She swallowed hard, tears glistening. I know I can't undo what I did, and I know I have no right to ask, but if you could tell Ben, I hope he's happy. I didn't blink, didn't move, no, I said quietly. He's moved on, Nicole. You should too. She nodded, her lips trembling. I'm trying. And then she left, disappearing into the night, like the ghost of a life I'd buried. I closed the door, locking it behind me, and turned back to the living room where Ben was sprawled on the floor working through a new chess problem. Dad, he called, excitement in his voice. Look at this. If white moves the knight here, black has to sacrifice the queen to avoid checkmate. I grinned, crossing the room to kneel beside him. You've got a good eye, kiddo, I said, ruffling his hair. That's a smart move. He smiled up at me, the pure joy in his face so different from the boy who once sat at that dinner table crushed under the weight of rejection. You taught me, he said. You said chess is like life, plan ahead, protect your king, and don't let anyone take what matters most. I nodded, my chest tight. That's right. And who's your king, Ben? He pointed at his chest. Me, he said. Damn right, I whispered. We sat there for a while, just the two of us, the soft click of chess pieces filling the room. Outside, the world kept spinning, full of schemes and betrayals, threats that whispered in the dark. But in here in this house, we were safe, and we were free. Later that night, after Ben fell asleep, I stood at the window looking out over the city. The skyline shimmered in the distance, lights twinkling like stars. I thought about the enemies I'd made, the people who had tried to tear us apart, and the price they'd paid. Some might call it ruthless. I called it being a father. And if they ever came for us again, if they even thought about it, they'd find out I wasn't just a man defending his family. I was the storm waiting for them in the dark. Morrison men stick together. Always.